distinguished guest.
Yes, well, the governor has already sort of been introduced, and so welcome. You've been to the Hideout before, although not on our show, although I believe you've been in attendance at our show before.
I've been in attendance at this wonderful opportunity to talk about politics and life in general. But it was also here not long ago when we remembered Studs Terkel. His archive is available now, and we had music. It was mentioned Sally Timms. She sang at the event. So the Hideout is a great, great place to come to learn about everything in life.
Excellent. And not least by any means, we have Reverend Greg Livingston here with us, who most recently was in the news for organizing the Lakeshore Drive protest last week, and also announcing that the next destination for the protest could be one of Chicago's airports. So we're going to hear a little bit about that. But welcome to the show, Greg. Well, we'd like to hear, before we get into all the stuff that's been in the news, we'd like to hear a little bit about you. This is one of the things we like to do in the show. So, Greg, can you tell everybody, before you were in the news these last couple of weeks, and before that you've worked on political campaigns, you've been out there for a lot of stuff. Tell us, tell us a little bit about your story. Not the whole thing, but tell us a little bit how you got here.
Oh yeah, born and bred Chicago on the South Side. My family started off in Inglewood. We ended up in Washington Heights, which abuts Beverly. So I got a whole bunch of South Side Irish friends, you know. And my training buddy right now in the gym is a guy named Eddie Combs. Some of you might know him. He's from Evergreen Park, the world's greatest power lifter. He's also crazy, but it's all good, you know. And had a lot of experiences growing up where I grew up, especially, you know, in the late 60s, 70s, is that, you know, I worked at Evergreen Plaza, I worked at Tom McCann Shoes, and up to that time I had only gone to black schools. And so then I started getting white friends, you know, so it was a great experience for both of us. A lot of my friends with the Brother Rice, Mother Mac, St. Rita, you know, it was football. That was the thing that brought everybody together, and they had programs, and everybody hated Joliet Catholic, right? I mean, I'm a sophomore in high school, a sophomore from Joliet Catholic, because he's benching 400 pounds. I'm like, how is he doing that? You know what I mean? Because they had a program, man. We just had speed. That's publicly, okay? So, ended up going to University of Illinois, Chicago. We called it Circle back then, because it was a real circle, you know. And worked in the markets for a little while. Bear Stearns, they're gone. Lehman Brothers, they're gone. Prue Beige, they're gone. You know, so it's the nature of the beast. And then ended up going to seminary in 1992. And so did a lot there. Was very active with a guy named Heisel Taylor in Evanston. Some of my political stuff, I was National Field Secretary for the Rainbow Push Coalition. Jesse and I kind of traveled the world together. And but I've passed it along the way in Inglewood, Austin, Roseland. I've passed into some of the most challenging areas in the city. And one of the things that I've learned, you know, nothing's easy about it, is trying to inspire the uninspired, trying to inspire the jaded. You know, it's such a task when you have to deal with persons. You know, I was telling Ben the other day, I was suited up, I was in the hood, you know, had a suit on, and a little 3-year-old girl, black girl with her mother, and she sees me and she says, "Mommy, he's DCFS." And I said, yeah, but I'm saying to myself, what a world view at the age of 3. So I could already see her trajectory, right? I saw her path already, a person that the system is basically parenting her. And she sees a black man in a suit and she thinks DCFS. And so when we talk about things like violence and just all of these things, all this is wrapped up into a big piece. I was fortunate to have parents from the South, from Arkansas. They had survival skills when they migrated here in the 50s. And I come from an old family. My grandfather was born in 1883. So I'm like 2 generations of 2 people removed from slavery. His father, Nelson Livingston, was a slave. And his older brother, my great uncle Teddy, was tarred and chained to a tree and burned alive, you know. And I never forget grandfather saying, "Daddy came and got us and said, we have to go take Teddy down." And that's all he would say, "We have to go take Teddy down." So these things were always in my consciousness. But so but I've really been influenced by Dr. King a great deal. I'm a real believer in love, and I can use the Paul Tillichian definition of love. He says that love is the striving, the laboring, the fight to reunite that which should be one. It's about having oneness. And so that's how I see Chicago in terms of what we're doing. Let's end the tale of two cities and just become one city.
Then Greg, if he doesn't win outright, the best dressed person ever to appear on stage with us, certainly in the top 5.
Definitely the best voice.
A suit in the bar, right? You know what I mean?
A suit.
Governor Quinn, you got a lot of voters out here, people who are followers of politics. Tell all of us something about you they haven't heard before. Why are you still doing this? That's one thing. Why are you still doing this?
Well, see, I was here at the Hideout, which is a wonderful place, and I was with Mark Baser. He does that show on Channel 11, and he asked me that very question. So I got to give the same answer. And so in 1968, in April, I was at a playground with asphalt, playing basketball with my friends, and I dunked a basketball, not once, but twice.
Wow.
And that was the only time I did it my whole life. So I've played below the rim ever since. But I did dunk the basketball. My friends didn't believe it, so I had to do it twice. But back to what Greg was saying, if you go back 100 years, we just heard the history of the Hideout, and what a wonderful place this is where people come together to organize. And to me, that's what Chicago is. That's what we all have to do, is organize for causes. And there was a great organizer in Chicago 100 years ago. She was the first American woman to ever receive the Nobel Peace Prize, Jane Addams. And she believed that the cure for the ills of democracy was more democracy. And I believe that too. And I think Studs Terkel, who I mentioned earlier, he was a believer in democracy. He told me one time he always signed petitions, no matter what they were. He believed in signing petitions. And my doctor, who was Stud's doctor as well, Dr. Quentin Young, who has passed on, a wonderful man. I walked across Illinois with Quentin from the Mississippi River and Rock Island all the way to Chicago. We did this in 2001 on behalf of decent health care for everyone. And Greg mentioned Dr. King. Well, Quentin Young was his physician when Dr. King lived in Chicago in 1966. I was high school at the time. But Dr. King, when he lived on the West Side, said the worst form of discrimination was denying people decent health care. So Quentin and I went there on the Mississippi River Bridge, Centennial Bridge, and we walked all the way to Chicago and Lake Michigan, at Grant Park there. Studs Terkel met us at the end of the walk, and we always believe that the best way to make changes is not from the top down, but bubbling up from the grassroots. And a great singer who also came from Chicago was with Dr. King. Her name was Mahalia Jackson. And Mahalia Jackson always sang for free for the walking people. She believed in those everyday people who weren't celebrities, they weren't going to be on TV or in the newspaper, but they were the heart and soul of the movement. And we have to make changes through movements, and that's why I believe so much in petition and referendum. And if you go back, we're in the month of August here, back in 1963, on August 28th, the Lincoln Memorial, there was a speech by Dr. King, an immortal speech. And right near the end of it, there's a woman's voice. That's Mahalia Jackson from the city of Chicago. And she said, "Tell them about the dream, Martin. Tell them about the dream." And that's when he riffed it in from his prepared text to the immortal words of "I have a dream." So we all have to have dreams. We have to have a dream of our city, especially being much more democratic with a small d. That we don't have to have bossism and machine politics and top-down government. That's why I believe in grassroots democracy. Whether it's statewide or here in Chicago, we got to remember what Jane Addams said: more democracy.
Mahalia at Newport, one of the best albums ever of all time, by the way.
All right, well, then let's just get to the big news of the day in terms of Pat Quinn. And that is, yesterday you submitted 86,000 plus signatures to the Board of Election Commissions right here in the city of Chicago, right? And to get on the ballot in November, a referendum which would allow folks in the city to vote on whether we have a term limit, term limit, which is essentially, it's a vote on whether we want Mayor Ron to be the mayor again. We might as well just put that word in there, but I don't know how to figure that one out. Yeah. So, all right, Pat, so I got so many questions to ask you about this one, which I probably have asked you all these questions a million times on the radio show. All right, so the first question is this, and term limits is generally seen as a Republican, a conservative tool, a tactic. Ronner talks about it all the time, going after Madigan. You've sort of flipped the switch a little bit. You got lefties like me signing your petition, mainly because you just bug me so much. But so why do you think this is a legitimate issue that a progressive group of people, most of the people in this room are the progressive persuasion, why do you think this is an issue that they should champion?
Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, term limits are not a conservative movement, or for that matter, a progressive movement. They're really a voter movement. The idea is to have competition. And the cities that have done term limits, in particular, on executive officials like mayors, that's 9 out of 10 of the largest cities in America have term limits on their mayor. It's New York, and Los Angeles, and Houston, and Philadelphia. Chicago is the only city without a term limit on the mayor. If you look at those cities, once they adopted term limits, there was more competition for the office of mayor. And people who had been left out over the years had a chance to run. In Los Angeles, they elected the first Hispanic mayor of Los Angeles. In Seattle, in San Francisco, they elected the first Asian American person to be mayor. In Houston, a woman won for mayor for the first time. She happened to be gay. And the big thing about term limits is they break up concentrated power. And oftentimes it's arrogance of power. And what we've had in Chicago, especially in recent years, is too much power in one person in one office. Term limits are the ultimate campaign finance reform. You know, I signed a law when I was governor to put limits for the first time on contributions to people who are running for not only mayor, but governor or any other office in Illinois. It took a long time, but we got limits on the office, or running for any office, on the contributions. But there were loopholes in that for self-funders and all of that. And the next thing you know, we were having $25 million spent on the last mayoral election in Chicago by one person.
You can basically buy your way out of the limits now.
Yeah, exactly right. And you have also not only the candidate getting money far above the limits because of the self-funding and all this, but also the super PACs, and now those PACs that have, what do they call them, dark money PACs, or whatever they call them.
Non-profits that are funneling money into campaigns.
So if the incumbent can constantly aggregate all this money, it makes it very difficult for challengers with very modest amounts of any money to run against the incumbent. So the concept of term limits began at the beginning of this country. Washington and all the founding fathers were very suspicious of monarchy. They didn't want concentrated power. George III, King of England, was on the throne for 59 years. George Washington voluntarily left after 8 years, and King George couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe this guy was leaving on his own. But if you're going to have a democracy and not a monarchy, you had to have what they called at that time rotation of office. So the same people weren't in the same office for too long a period of time. So that's what we're trying to put on the ballot in Chicago, let the people vote. We got the signatures yesterday. It was really inspiring. Greg signed our petition, and you know, the broad cross-section of people who not only signed the petition, but circulated the petition is healthy. And one thing we got to remember is Chicago, once upon a time, 100 plus years ago, was the center of initiative and referendum, not only in the Midwest, but the whole country. And unfortunately, we have to catch up now and have more opportunity for people to vote on issues rather than candidates.
All right, well, first of all, I signed that they did you sign it, Mick?
I did not sign it.
Did you not sign it because, oh, you're not allowed?
I don't
Okay.
sign petitions in general.
Is that right?
I'm a reporter. No, I don't.
He was a reporter back then. He was with us on time.
I'm still a reporter.
You're still a reporter.
Wow.
I always
Unless
thought
something's happened
petitions-
since I left the office 2 hours ago. But everybody, I actually maybe the only person in Chicago who didn't see you at an event with clipboard. Because where were you? Because we've heard you were at an immigration march. Ben's wife saw you at the Amy Mann concert last week. We've heard you were at farmers markets. So it sounds like you got out and about.
We went to Chosen Few with, Greg knows about that, out on the south side. We went to everything we could. Matter of fact, I would read Ben's column, and then I'd look in the reader for all the events that were going on. And we would show up at the events. But I would always read your column first.
Well, that's good. And then we'll quiz you on those columns in a little while. But one thing is for certain, I always tell you this, Mayor Rahm's going to come after you. Getting those 86,000 signatures is just the first step. And Greg knows a little bit about this because he was with the Willie Wilson campaign in 2015. And Mayor Rahm went after Willie Wilson, was unsuccessful. Ricky Hendon and Frank Avila beat him off, and they were able to keep Willie Wilson on the ballot. We had a runoff. If I were advising Rahm, I would advise him to leave you alone and let the chips fall where they may in November. But like Rahm's going to take my advice.
Wait a second. No, you wouldn't. If you were advising Rahm, that's why would he do that? I mean, I'm not saying I'm not saying I want him to fight the initiative. I'm just saying, why would Rahm not fight the initiative?
Oh, well, first of all, Rahm would never listen to me on my advice, so he would never do that suggestion. Why would I suggest that?
Why is it good advice for Rahm?
Because I believe that Rahm needs to validate his existence as our mayor. Well, that's a whole other issue. But I realize that what I'm saying here is outside of the realm of how Rahm Emanuel views the world, obviously, and so he would never consider what I'm saying from a realistic point of view, and he'd roll his eyes at it. And most Chicagoans would probably roll their eyes at it as well. But I don't believe Rahm Emanuel has really ever been a valid candidate in the city. He was sort of shoved down our throats back in 2011. Most Chicagoans didn't even know anything about him. They voted on him thinking that he was somehow or other Barack Obama's hand-picked candidate, when really Barack Obama was just kicking him out of the White House, just trying to get rid of him because Michelle couldn't take him for another minute. Then in 2015, he should have been defeated, but a series of breaks, both horrific and Karen getting sick, Tony Preckwinkle chickening out, left him with a very weak field, and even then Barack Obama had to come to his rescue.
Mike Madigan told him to come.
Yeah, Mike Madigan told him to come, and he came to his rescue and saved him. And then soon thereafter, the Laquan McDonald video, we suddenly realized that he'd been concealing. So all these things in my mind, for many Chicagoans, I think if you ask them, there's a lot of resentment toward Rahm Emanuel, and there's a strong feeling that he's not really a mayor of the people, but Chicagoans have this fear. They have this fear that's inbred in them of challenging a strong mayor, so they just keep electing these powerful mayors because they're afraid if he says, I'm gonna beat Pat Quinn, and he can beat Pat Quinn in November, then he'll probably win first round in February, because this would be opening round of the mayoral.
Correct. And the people who hate, go ahead.
Can I tell a quick Rahm story? This was, is this being recorded?
Yes. Yes, it is being recorded by that good-looking man right there.
That's even better. It's Mr. Rogers' kid, yeah. This was the day after the election. And so it was me, Rahm, and Willie over at Willie's penthouse on Wacker. And so Rahm wants to come and try to cut a deal, with Willie. And so, Willie's sitting here. You have to know Willie Wilson and love him. But Willie's sitting right here. I'm sitting right here. Rahm's sitting across. Has on a Bill Cosby sweater,
That was that thing.
Yeah. And so me and Rahm have been kind of going at it since 2011, because I was pastoring the church in Roseville. I had 3 mothers. I think it was like in 1 week they had kids murdered or something, And that year was when like half the murders in Chicago were in Roseland. We had more deaths than they had in Afghanistan. It was just crazy, right? I remember we had a New York Times reporter come out, and he sat on the stairs. All of a sudden, he heard automatic weapons popping off and stuff, you know. But we've been going at it since that time. Anyway, the day after the election, he comes over, and so I'm sitting here. He's sitting there. He stands up and he looks at me and he goes, "I got big balls." And I said, okay, Mr. Mayor. And then he looked at me again and he said, he leaned like forward, you know, because he wants to be a little gangster, right? He says, "I got big balls." And I said, "Me too, Mr. Mayor." And when he looked at him, he said, "You crazy, Mr. Mayor, you crazy," you know? And it was at that point I understood who he was, who he wants to be. And that's why he will challenge anyone, because he has always been protected from his dad, you know, back when his dad was an allergist up on the North Shore, his brother Ari on the West Coast, Ezekiel on the East Coast, Barack. Now Michelle, she surely wanted him out, and Hillary can't stand him either. But he has been able to get by. That's why when the governors had that petition, I was like, man, I got to sign this, because we got to hit this cat from different sides, right? Because he thinks that he is a gangster. I mean, it is just the most incredible thing. So I was talking to one of the guys, I don't want to give the guy away, but he's one of his security guys. He was like, man, he said, this dude is so insecure. You know, and I don't mean to just disparage the man in any way whatsoever, but he's done some things that I am not, and a lot of people are not happy with, that have made a real difference in this city. And but his psychology is such, I have to learn and understand that as a triathlete, he's not going to quit. He's not going to quit. But you got to quit him. You understand? You got to choke him out. You know what? You got to knock him out. You got to deliver the blow. That's why that's one blow, and we're trying to deliver another blow. I ain't gonna lie to you, man. I'm trying to toxify and make that cat so radioactive that his friends won't deal with him. And that, because that's the only thing that will affect him, his friends.
All right, a couple things. It's hard to follow up the ball story. The first thing is, we have invited, just in case any of Ram's supporters, friends, or employees are out there, we have invited him. I just last week wrote an email to his campaign. We've invited him to come up here. I'm not sure he ever will, but if you're open to it, Mr. Mayor, we would love to have you on stage, and we will treat you fairly, just like we treat all of our guests, even those we do not agree with. That's the first thing. Second thing is, all right, if I'm Ram or one of his people, despite everything you're saying, I'm fighting that. What do you have to lose? The people who hate you, they're not going to stop hating. They're going to continue to hate you if you fight this thing. The people who like you expect you to fight this thing. For politically, there is absolutely no cost to Rahm Emanuel fighting the governor.
Well, I don't agree with that. We did a poll, a scientific poll, and found that 75% of the people of Chicago will at least want to vote on this question. And matter of fact, they were asked, do you think it's more important to have an advisory referendum on whether Chicago should abolish plastic straws, or whether have a binding referendum on this subject? And you know, when you think about it, after 2 terms, not only presidents, but mayors and governors, you know, it's a time to kind of reassess. If you have 2 elected 4-year terms, should you get a 3rd one? And that's really the decision that Chicago voters will make on November 6th. We have a big important election for governor. Hopefully our side wins. But we want a lot of people in Chicago to turn out and decide what the rules are for mayor for the rest of time. You know, they're changing the rules. The voters are changing the rules. The mayor can't, if the voters vote in favor of term limits, 2-term limit, the mayor can't change it. City council can't change it. And the bottom line is, and it's decided by the voters, what the rules are for the mayor. And I think that's a very healthy expression of democracy. And I really hope that we get a major turnout in Chicago on this very important question. Once upon a time, when Chicago began, there was a 1-year term for mayor in 1837, when Ben was covering that for the reader.
You read it too.
Yeah, there you go. I was there. I was just in grammar school then.
He was railing against tips then too.
They changed the rules for mayor in 1863 to make it a 2-year term. Then, in 1907, that's when it became a 4-year term for mayor. Now, the voters in hopefully 2018 at the ballot box decide whether the mayor gets 2 terms, 2 consecutive 4-year terms. Then you got to step aside and let real competition take place. And last point on this money thing, it's worse than ever. All the big money in politics. And if you really want to say no to that, then the incumbents who are able to aggregate all this money on behalf of their own re-election, well, they have to stop after 2 terms. And I think that's a healthy way to go.
Well, why didn't you do this when, I know you had some other things going on like running the state, but why didn't you do this when Richard Daley was in office for 22 years? What about the alderman? Ed Burke has been in there since 1969, taking over, by the way, after his dad died, who was the alderman before him. That's not an uncommon story. So, term limits for executive offices, I guess there's a couple questions, and for all you guys, Greg, please jump in on this. Term limits for executive offices only, or should we do it for the city council or other offices? And why now? Is this just about Ron, or is this about the principle?
It definitely is not about Ron personally. It's about the principle. And, I think it's important, especially as I keep repeating, in the era of big money and Citizens United, we've got to have a way to stop insiders, people who've been in office for a long period of time, of being able to stay there because of their ability to just aggregate huge amounts of money. And that's what's happened in the city of Chicago. Now, I feel that with respect to this issue, it is one that is allowed to the people of Illinois in a binding way. And 25 cities have already done this in Illinois. Springfield, Naperville, Oak Lawn, Des Plaines, Downers Grove. But why don't we have a referendum in Chicago? Never in the 181-year history of the city of Chicago has there been a binding referendum put on the ballot by voter petition until now. And I think this is something we want to build upon. We want to have more issues that people can decide. And so I think for the mayor, given the situation, he should honor the referendum. He can vote against it if he wanted, campaign against it. But if he tries to keep it off the ballot, we're going to fight for our rights because we have a fundamental right to this referendum.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious to all of us on stage that he will fight to keep it off. He have several tactics he'll use. One, the first one, obvious one, to try to knock off as many signatures as he can. Like he'll say Greg Livingston should have been Gregory as opposed to Greg, and that Ben should be Benjamin instead of Ben. I think he'll take, mine will be the first signature he knocks off. And then if that doesn't work, he'll go after the issue of the, that he has his 3 non-binding matters.
Yeah, explain that to people who haven't been following all the ins and outs.
Well, all right, that's Rom's oldest trick in the book, talking about not being a valid mayor. I think probably most people in this room know there's a rule. I'm not sure if it's a state rule or a city rule, but whatever. State law. We're only allowed to have 3 non-binding questions on any ballot at any time. So when the school activists wanted to have a referendum, citywide referendum on an elected school board, Ron put 3 meaningless questions on the ballot to crowd them off, like, should I change my tie or whatever?
Would you like crime higher or lower?
Yeah, would you like? No, it has to be yes or no.
Yes or no.
Yeah. So, would you like crime higher? No. So those are the kinds of, and then he goes on to Then he goes to Channel 11, man, I can't believe this. And he says, well, these are important questions. I really want to know what people want to, like, that I did things differently once I got the results, like, do you want taxes? Anyway, so, and that's what that's a tactical use. And Pat says that the law backs him because this is binding. It has precedent over 3 non-binding. We'll see. It'll come down to Ann Burke and the Illinois Supreme Court. Ed Burke's wife, who of course she swore you in as governor, so maybe that'll count for something. So you see, Mick, these are the kinds of issues that Ron will be trying to use. Now, here's a question I have for Greg Livingston, because Mick asked a very good point. He was essentially saying that there are no there's nothing negative, there's no down to Ron challenging this. What do you think the negative ramifications could be for Mayor Rahm if he sicks Mike Casper and his election lawyers on Pat and tries to get this knocked off the ballot on some kind of legal technicality?
it just shows him to be the tyrant that he is, and that he wants to have all the power to be able to do whatever he wants to do with his slush fund, tip fund and everything else. And so instead of having a competitive, democratic, city that's healthy for the entire city, he just wants to keep, because I have a problem with all these aldermen, black, white, brown, yellow, white, I don't care. They have issues, man, and so, oh, they really do. But it's just going to show that he's a tyrant. I mean, and people look at you funny sometimes, but when you've actually dealt with him, I remember Karen Lewis told me a story before she got sick, and when she had some heft, she was heavier. And so she was in Rom's office, and she said, Rom comes up to me, and he pushes me. And she says, I'm like twice as big as he is, And so he pushed me again. I said, what did you do, Karen? She said, I planted him into the wall. And I said, what did he do? He smiled at me and said, let's go to the ballet.
Oh, wait a minute. No, I told Ron to do that. Matter of fact, Karen Lewis, she's a good friend of mine,
right.
And she actually called me from Forest Hills, New York, the U.S. Open tennis. She likes tennis, and she loves she loves opera.
Right.
That's what it is, opera. So when I first met Ron, when I was governor, we had him come over, and he had won the first round there in 2011. I suggested that, well, you got to get to know Karen Lewis, a good friend. You might want to take her out to dinner and then go to the opera.
Right.
And he told me that he didn't want that advice from me. And so when he first met Karen, used some very bad language.
Right.
And she said, my father never talked to me that way with those words. My husband never talked to me that way with those words. And he is not going to talk to me with those words. And that, that didn't get the relationship off to a good start. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And that was sad. I thought that was something the mayor should have paid attention to.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I still think it's going to be very difficult to get this referendum. 86,000 or more signatures is still going to be difficult to get it on, and I think some of the proof, the attitude that they're going to have is indicated by Patrick O'Connor. His quotes in today's Sun-Times, the alderman of the 40th Ward, Mayor Rahm's floor leader, he was disdainful of the petitions, and he said, you need 52,000, you should have had 3 times that amount, so you didn't have enough. So you had collected 86,000, and he's saying you should have 150,000, so it's like a throwdown to you. So what's your response to Patrick O'Connor?
Well, how many petition drives, volunteer petition drives, not done by machines or any of that, have ever collected that number of signatures ever in the history of Chicago? I think it's a remarkable achievement by volunteers, and we have good signatures. We're going to defend them every step of the way. These insiders who want to put 3 questions on the ballot to try and keep us off. The Constitution of Illinois is very clear. It was passed in 1970 and ratified by the voters. They specifically wanted to give voters a binding initiative and referendum right to be able to change their municipal government. It's been done in 25 cities already in Illinois, and we're going to do it in Chicago. And these folks like the mayor, or Pat O'Connor, or any of the others who think they can just, by a wave of the hand, take away the right of people to petition and put a binding referendum on the ballot, they're just plain wrong. And I've won cases in the Illinois Supreme Court, and the Illinois Supreme Court has actually said that initiative, what we're trying to do with petition passing, it's a fundamental right of the people. It's subject to strict scrutiny anytime the city council or the legislature tries to tamper with it. And we've got to protect those rights, and I've said several times tonight, we've got to expand that. We've got to be able to vote on things in Chicago, like reforming the TIF process, or doing something to expand health care, or making sure that we have in our city a clean election law that allows people to run for office even if they're not millionaires. After term limits, both Los Angeles and New York City, both of them, have passed municipal public financing laws that allow everyday people to run for alderman or mayor. And we need that in Chicago, and obviously this mayor is immune or allergic to that, but this term limit referendum, I think, is a good shot in the arm to open up politics in Chicago to a lot more people.
Before we go to the audience, people, I'm sure a lot of people want to ask questions. I have to ask Gregory Livingston this question here. It's been a week since the Michigan out of the Lakeshore Drive March, closed off Lakeshore Drive, marched on Wrigley Field. You and Tito Hardeman have had some time to think about it, particularly in the aftermath of this weekend with the shootings. In your mind, was it a successful march? Was it worth the effort and the energy? And also your comments on Gary McCarthy, sort of throwing down the challenge, saying if he was mayor, he never would have let you take Lakeshore Drive at all. That it was a lawlessness, disrespectful to the police, et cetera, et cetera. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, firstly, one reason I picked August 2nd as the date to do this, besides the fact that it was a weekday during work time, during rush hour before a Cubs game, during the start of Lollapalooza, was that Sunday, this past Sunday, August 5th, was the 52nd anniversary of Dr. King's march through Marquette Park. And Dr. King, of course, did not have it sanctioned by Richard J. Daley. He didn't strategize with the police chief at that time, but as all of his marches, they did it because they felt it was right. And Dr. King was number one that was against or had a hate for the oppressor. His whole idea was, let's all of us become who God created us to be, which is great, even if we don't realize it yet. And so they took the chance, they took the risk, they had skin in the game to go there to prick the consciousness, and of course he got hit in the head with a brick, knocked to the ground. Fortunately, he wasn't permanently injured, but you know, it was all part of something, you know, that was necessary in his mind. And so the whole idea in terms of, and I'll get to the effectiveness, but it's not civil disobedience if you ask permission. And one of the places that Dr. King got that from was Gandhi, but also from St. Augustine. He said that an unjust law is no law at all. So at that time, Dr. King was fighting against restrictive covenants and things like that. If you've seen the play, the movie Raisin in the Sun, Lorraine Hansberry, that was about restrictive covenants, right? And so he was saying that we should all be able to live where we want to live, because Chicago has been intentionally segregated. And in his work, he said Chicago was the most segregated place he had ever been, which is a huge statement when you talk about Birmingham and Selma and places like that. It's incredible. But what some people, you know, and it was really, you know, this past weekend was just, oh my, it's beyond me. But the march was never intended to be an anti-violence mechanism. Many people say, well, it still happened. Well, the idea of the march was to inspire the uninspired. And by that I mean this. We brought people from the South and West Side. My people were from down South. When I was a kid, I was scared to go downtown. That's my personal experience. My parents had never gone that far north in their entire lives, up to Clark Street or something like that. And so we wanted to bring people up this way, right? We have to be disruptive, that's true. We have to be disruptive. But, you know, I wanted people to get an idea of what a well-funded neighborhood looks like, of what an optimally ran police district is like, so they can go back to where they come from with a different level or standard of dissatisfaction and having an understanding that, wait a minute, you know, I didn't see shuttered businesses over here. I didn't see blocks of foreclosed homes. Nobody broke an ankle because the streets were paved, right? And so they go back and say, there's another way to be. And again, you know, it is about inspiring them, because it's hard. It is difficult to wake somebody up from a slumber where they've been numbed down to, you know, just to accept X, Y, Z. Because, you know, we're telling the people, look, Ron has been sitting on $500 million in HUD, low-income housing money. I was talking to the cops, right, because they have boots on the ground. There are people on the South and West Side that don't have working toilets. I've been in their houses. They have buckets, right? They can't afford a plumber, or they're in some kind of housing. They don't have heat in the wintertime. You know, I've been there with a bunch of heaters all over the place, you know. They don't have running water in the summertime. And we're saying, couldn't $500 million make a difference? And I said to the cops, do you think we have less violence if people had a decent place to lay their heads at night? You know, would it make a difference if you had a toilet that worked? Would you feel better? Because I feel that if people feel better, they do better. And so we were trying to really, it was a wonderful scene at the end of the march. There we are with the barricades and the horses and all that. And there are the Wrigley Field fans, and it looked like it was all white, and that's cool, you know. I'm used to white people. Y'all like the grass and the trees. To me, just background. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? I mean, it's more of y'all, you know. It's about 200 million, I guess. You know, we used to y'all, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, sorry. But I told him, and we talked through with the Bullhorns and the folk up there and the folk down here, is that we all want to be one. How can we become one? How can we all come together? And so the segregation creates two things, insulation and desperation. The segregation that allows access to be on one side creates an insulation from the desperation that allows the withholding of assets on the other side. And so this desperation finds an expression in violence, right? And so in terms of getting people out there, it's about moving something. He was saying it before. It's about making something happening. And people said, what do you think about protest fatigue? The people that need stuff, they ain't fatigued. You know what I mean? It may be the people that are watching that are tired of watching it, but I had a lady on the radio say to me yesterday, I'm from the suburbs and everything. I'm cool with that. Like, I love my city. I love downtown. I love the skyline, right? And she says, I don't understand why folk can't do this and folk can't do that. I said, well, ma'am, if you were to switch places with her, she would be saying the same thing you are right now, unless there is something intrinsically better about you. If there is something intrinsically better about you, then I can understand why you could be in her situation and still be the way you are right now. Does that make sense, everybody? And sometimes it's a hard thing to accept or to even empathize with, because you heard us use the phrase, want to redistribute the pain. But I go further than that. Not just redistribute the pain, but the anguish and the dormant hope. Because I believe that folk who don't know that they have it good, right, are not really conscious that they have it good, that once you allow them to interact and be exposed with other folk, and then other folk who don't have it good, because we see all these shootings this weekend, there's a reason for all that. It's not just nonsensical mayhem. There's a reason why people are just capping, man. It's crazy. I had a nephew shot in the head, paralyzed on his right side, and I got a chance to observe his psychology when he was coming back from that, still paralyzed, and there's a reason for that, everybody. But I don't want to dominate the time, but I feel that we were effective and that we started something. It's not the end, but we started something. We got some folk together. We started off with 150 on Lakeshore Drive. People got upset. We wanted people to get upset. Granddaddy, Arkansas, hound dog on the porch with his friend. Hound dog just crying and whining. His friend says, why is that dog crying like that? Granddaddy says, because he's lying on a nail. He says, why doesn't he move? He said, it doesn't hurt bad enough yet. Human nature sometimes requires an extra push of discomfort and inconvenience before it'll do something.
All right, what? A question for all of you guys. What happened this weekend, just mind-boggling to everybody, even those of us who lived here for a long time, who've had bad weekends and bad stretches before. But what realistically can Rom do about it? I mean, all right, well, because I have this argument with people. I mean, to me, it's a question of leadership. It's not necessarily people demanding Rom to fix every social issue that's led up to this for 50 years and whatever, but it's just like there's people sense that there's a lack of leadership. That's my take on it, but I want to hear from you guys.
He didn't start it, but he cannot be allowed to perpetuate it. By this I mean, we can't keep talking about reducing violence until we start talking about the corrupt tree that produces it. You see, there's a big difference there. Corruption breeds and generates violence. What do you mean, Livingston, corruption? And corruption has a name, because violence is personal, corruption is personal. Me and Eddie Johnson, we attended the same high school and grammar school. He was, in my opinion, and many opinions, illegitimately hired. What do I mean by that? By law, we spent $500,000 doing a national search for a new police superintendent of the second largest police department in the country. And so then we get 3 rigorously vetted persons who, as I understand it, are known as reformers, law enforcement executives who are reformers. Ron did not want them. He didn't want somebody that would give him pushback. So he suspends the law at city council for one day and hires a man, my friend, my alumnus, right? We got our big boy pants on now, though. And, he suspends the law in city council for one day and brings the guy in who didn't apply for the job, had no interest in the job, and makes him superintendent. And then Eddie says, in my whole career, I've never seen discrimination. I said, Eddie, You send officers to racial sensitivity training. How can you say you've never seen discrimination? And that's when I realized that we have a superintendent without a spine and a mayor without a heart. You know, that kind of corruption, he has disappointed so many folk because the legacy of law enforcement and the black community, that legacy is real, everybody. Somebody said, why did Harith Augustus run? As little black boys, we always ran. We saw the police coming. It was instinctive because back when I was a kid, they had saps. Y'all know what saps are, man? You know, like sap sticks, sap gloves, billy clubs, and they would give you a whooping. Now, my Irish friends up to my Southside Irish, they would steal beer, Pat. You don't know nothing about that, you know what I'm saying? They would go steal, be on Western at Fox's Pub, man, and they would steal beer from the back, right? Their buddy would give it to Andy. Yeah, John, take this back over to Rich Park, you know, and stuff. And they would run too, but they wouldn't suffer the same fate we did because Plato's Republic, the role of the guardian is to remain the status quo. And so if you have second-class citizenship status, that means that if you're trying to rise above your station, it is the role of the guardian in today's world law enforcement to keep you in your place. So when the Irish come over here in the 1800s, they're not considered to be in the same class as the English or as the Germans or something like that, but they're made to be the guardians of the status quo in order to protect the elite. Am I close? You know, gangs in New York, man, what I'm saying, you know what I mean? But blacks couldn't marry up. You know, people would marry up. Italians didn't want a vowel on the end of their name. You know, they wanted to marry up, you know, and so, because interracial marriage was illegal in America. But so there you have the inter-ethnic marriages, if you will. And so all this comes into play, everybody, when you talk about the relationship of blacks and law enforcement and how that, you know, plays itself out. I don't know what I said.
So you hold. Let me try to translate. And then we want to get some questions soon. But you hold Mayor Emanuel accountable for the state of the police department. That's one of the things you're hammering away at here. Is that at the very least, maybe he can't fix all these other social ills that we've been talking about, but the state of the police department, he is in charge of that, and you're holding him to account for not doing something about the corruption.
When he said there was going to be a Chinese firewall between his office, the 5th floor, and the police department, I'm like, that's a bunch of crap. You know what I mean? I mean, you're the mayor, the buck stops with you. It's just like with the Laquan McDonald piece. You mean to tell me, I know you get, what you call that, plausible deniability? You mean to tell me that Gary McCarthy, you know, there's only one person he answers to, and you have no idea? You pay off the family $5 million in cash. These are some poor people that live in the hood, and an armored truck rolls up and gives you $5 million in cash. I mean, come on, everybody. You know, it is just, you know, the way I see how Ron is, I see it almost like social engineering to run folk out, the people that are considered to be undesirables, to run them out. And to some people, that may sound like drastic and dangerous language. But when you talk about the most massive closing of schools in the history of America at 50, and then at one point it was costing taxpayers, us, $1 million a day to maintain these closed schools. You know, water, gas, heat, all that kind of stuff, security. And that's money that could have been spent another way. Just like he flushed those thousands of dollars down in that search for a superintendent, the way that he spends money is scary. And he has no check against him with city council because they're all bought and paid for. And the only way that something's going to happen, you know, I'm a fan of Ben. I ain't gonna lie to you. Ben got a lot of courage, man. And so I've been knowing Mick for a little bit, and I love Mick too. But Ben be saying some stuff in that reader, man, that'd be like off the chain. You know what I mean? And he need to keep his head on the swivel. And then with Pat, with Governor Quinn. Governor Quinn's out here pushing that, man. Now, I know what he said. He sounds real fancy, but it's about getting around out of there. You know what I'm saying? So, but we ain't going to tell nobody, you know. But it's real, everybody. It's so real. And in certain parts of town, people are just dying, literally dying because of some of these things.
All right, Governor, real quickly, just want you to weigh in. Is there something else the mayor can and should be doing?
When I was governor, one of the most important programs we had, it was called Put Illinois to Work. And we had $10 an hour jobs, most of them in the private sector, some in not-for-profit, where people who needed a job were able to get it with a private employer for 6 months, If that employer liked them, they could keep them. Otherwise, they could go on. The employer didn't have to pay anything. It was one of the very best ways in the middle of that great recession that we had to get people back on their feet. And what Greg just said, if you don't have hope, and I've met people now who started with Put Illinois to Work, they're homeowners. You know, they got a chance. I actually was with President Obama when he came at O'Hare Field, and there was a woman who hired one of these workers, and her name was Octavia Jones, and I invited both Tiffany Henyard and Octavia Jones to come to see the president up there, and he got off the Air Force One, and I said, would you be willing to go over there, take a picture with these two young ladies? One of them just hired somebody under Put Illinois to Work. Octavia Jones needed a chance, and he said yes, and Tiffany threw me her disposable camera. I was the governor. I took the picture, and the bottom line is that these young people had a chance.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that we've got to make sure that when you're talking about Amazon and all these other big old companies, Sterling Bay over here, you don't forget that getting the Tiffany Henyards, who has a small business, to hire one more person who needs a fighting chance, that to me is a key part of fighting violence. I also think the mayor should walk every week in a different neighborhood of Chicago. I've walked with Father Mike many times on Friday nights, and I think doing that is a very important part of the mayor being accountable. I don't like politics in the Chicago Police Department. When I was governor, there was no politics at all in the Illinois State Police. You got to make sure you let the, not have political tampering with that department, and that goes with the Chicago Police Department. And then finally, my mom and dad grew up in Englewood. My grandfather owned a store at 1124 West 63rd Street, and that was a neighborhood that was extremely diverse. And we've got to understand that segregation, discrimination in housing and employment and health, that produces bad things happening and consequences for our whole city. So you got to have a mayor who always fights hard for making sure everybody's in, nobody's left out.
Right. Let's take some questions. Tim, thank you. Tim's up here with the remote.
Governor Quinn, are you willing to go to federal court and even the Illinois Supreme Court to get this their initiative validated to stay on the ballot instead of, because Ron is going to challenge this because he has something else better to do.
Yeah, well, there's a right in the Illinois state constitution that we must protect that right. It's not a federal court matter, it's a state court matter. And we cannot allow a mayor or a city council or anyone to take away rights from petition passers who have duly gathered the signatures to put a binding referendum on the ballot. So this is a really big case for grassroots democracy in Illinois. The answer is yes, we're obviously going to go to the Illinois Supreme Court where we have won before, and I expect the court to uphold our fundamental right. And it's kind of sad, I think. I was thinking about this when I was driving over. We already got the signatures yesterday, 86,481. That's far more than 52,519 that we needed. And, still there's this, well, how are you going to fight back Ron from keeping you off the ballot? Well, I don't think that's the way to look at it. The signatures are presumed to be valid. Our rights are clear in the Constitution. The law of Illinois gives us the right to be on the ballot. Let's have a campaign. If they don't want to have what we were talking about, term limits on the mayor, well, let's have a debate. That's what democracy is all about. This notion that somehow these cutthroats can push something off the ballot with their unfair technicalities, that's not right. And we're not going to let them get away with it. So the answer is, see you on November 6th, vote yes for Jim
Certainly you have prepared and have funding in place or volunteers in place to fight this, and just have to remind everybody that the aforementioned President Obama got his start as an elected official in part because he booted his opponent off the ballot to help get elected to the state Senate. So just a reminder of the context. This is Chicago.
Reverend Livingston, I just want to ask you again the same question I asked you last week at the march. In addition to the stated purpose of reducing violence in town, it was also specifically to get rid of ROM and secondarily the police chief. But after listening to 20 or 30 speeches on our version of the grassy knoll, didn't hear a single mention, not one, of one of the biggest tools we have at our disposal, which is voter registration. Is that something you're going to be addressing in your future demonstrations?
The great Bird Hoffman. You know, to be honest, no, we didn't discuss it, and I'll tell you why. We had to find a way to ignite interest. And so the rallying cry was resign Rom resign. And you know, there's so much voter apathy that exists that for us to focus on that would have required even more energy. But we feel that once we can get folk going on this end, then we can work our way to that. Because it was, you know, as you saw, it was a diverse group of folk there, a diverse group of political ideologies, but everybody agreed on one thing: we want Rom gone. So we just wanted to stick with what was working, and thereby, you know, create some infrastructure, create a platform, because we got to do the voter registration piece. I mean, that's key, because the vote is the unit of power in this country. No matter what your pedigree, bank account, whatever it is, the vote is that. But the problem with the machine is the vote is not, your enfranchisement is in jeopardy sometimes, depending on what ward you live in and who's open. I mean, that's the scary thing for me in terms of, and so, you know, but yeah, but you're right, Bert. I mean, that was something, but that just wasn't the time for it, because the folk that we had there, we wanted to make a scene, we wanted to have a demonstration. They wouldn't have really stopped for that. And we had something we wanted to show and to prove. So, but you're right. Yes, sir.
I just want to say one thing about that. I really feel that the best way to make change is at the ballot box. And Greg agrees with that.
Yes.
And you know, when I was governor, I wanted to get same-day voter registration. You know, it wasn't easy dealing with Mike Madigan and John Cullerton, as a matter of fact. Madigan told me, he said, you know, I've spent my whole career discouraging some people from voting. We only want the folks that vote our way to be registered to vote. And so I said we have to change that attitude. And he agreed.
Wait, Madigan said that to you?
Well, he sort of said it that way. Yeah. He said it in an, I would say, a facetious way. But it was an attitude change for Madigan and Cullerton to agree to the idea that when you come to vote, even if you're not registered, you could get registered on that day and vote. And so I got that law passed and I signed it. And I lost the election in 2014. I wasn't too happy about it. And at 10 o'clock, a lot of people still hadn't voted. They were up there at Wells Park or wherever it was, waiting in line to vote. And a lot of them hadn't registered yet, but they were going to get registered and vote. And I didn't want to concede anything until everyone had voted. And so the last guy to vote literally voted at 3 a.m.
Wow.
And I took him out to dinner a week or two later, and we went over to O'Brien's or somewhere, and I said, I really want to salute you for standing in line for all the way to 3 in the morning. It turned out because all those people hung in there. I didn't concede until the next day. I didn't have enough votes. I lost the election. But a guy named Mike Frericks, he won his election by a couple thousand votes, mainly because folks in Chicago who had same-day voter registration were able to register and vote, and mostly voted for him. That's how he won. And so I think this election coming up, one of the reasons I believe so much in initiative, and this one in particular, is issues oftentimes get people to turn out. And I asked Madigan back in 2014, how about putting a binding referendum on the ballot to have an elected school board in Chicago? That'll really get people going. He said, no, can't be done. So this time it is a binding referendum. And this will turn people out. And hopefully if they're not registered yet, they'll get registered on election day and vote their conscience.
So are you telling us we should have been investigating a dinner for votes scheme at the end of the 2014 election?
No. It was breakfast.
Okay. All right, breakfast, okay. Yes.
Hi. the Reverend and the Governor both mentioned segregation in the context of violence reduction. So could you both comment on kind of if this issue, which has been around for forever, is going to get political, are we going to get political traction on this issue right now? And I'm thinking about the Metropolitan Planning Council that issued their cost of segregation report. I'm thinking about the Schreiber Center that released a report challenging aldermanic prerogative when it comes to affordable housing. Can you comment on if this city politically is ready to really hear and deal with this issue?
You know, you're too young to have been alive when Harold Washington was mayor. That was a real disruption in this city. The first election, a Republican named Bernie Epton, and a Republican running for mayor in Chicago, right? It was, so then when Harold gets in office, there's the Verdoliak 29 and the Washington 21, because, you know, there was this leader, and I'm not, you know, canonizing Harold by any means, but there was this leader who was going to try to change things in the city. Unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to do many of the things that he wanted to do, but he had the vision and the political will to get that done. Well, then his successor was a man who was just a place filler. No offense to Mr. Sawyer at all. You know, then we have Richard M. Daley that comes in. Then after Richard M., we have Rob Emanuel. In terms of what you're saying, it requires political will to get some of these things done. You know, if the control that Ron has over city council right now, whatever he wants to get done, he can get done. But it's the political will to do so isn't there. And that's why we have to, you know, I had a discussion with Pastor Flager, and I said, Mike, you know, I said, he says, I don't want to mention people. I said, but Mike, violence is personal. You know, corruption is personal. I said, and no policy has ever written itself. We have to change, if we have to change policy by having a changed policymaker, you know? And so that's why you go after, people ask, what are you guys going to do? Well, we know there are aldermen and other folk, which is why we're trying to build the infrastructure to have a system and a mechanism where we get people at least to be on fire enough, you know, where we got to turn them up to turn them out, you know? And so that for me is the real key. I mean, he's the politician, the governor, he's the Georgetown lawyer. I'm just a poor peasant on the south side, you know what I mean? And so, but I do have one understanding of human nature, that if somebody is going to choose to do wrong over right, they got to go.
But, you know, I want to say something about affordable housing. You know, I do think this is a very serious problem if a particular alderman can block affordable housing by one vote, his own. That is not good for the city, and we have to really confront that. If that has been used, and it has been, to segregate and keep discrimination in place. You know, I have a friend of mine is John Arena, and he's trying to get affordable housing on the northwest side. And it's quite a battle. I think we really got to look at this aldermanic prerogative. That issue is very important for affordable housing. And affordable housing is oftentimes where the jobs are. And you have, if we're going to have a good city and a good state, you've got to have people who are hard workers being able to live close enough to where they work. They can't have these hour-and-a-half long commutes to and from. And another thing is the government, I think the state government in particular, has to invest in housing. When I was governor, for the first time in state history, we put about $140 million into the capital bill for housing, for building housing as well as for mortgages. And frankly, we need to put $1 billion into that, and I hope with the new Democratic governor we can work on that issue to make those investments that pay dividends for lifetimes.
And just so everybody understands, I know there's some colleagues of mine who are from out of town, and not everybody knows everything about how the system works inside here. But aldermanic prerogative, and it's a long tradition in Chicago, an alderman can basically have veto power over a particular proposal in his or her ward, and in this case we're talking about affordable housing. So on the far northwest side, traditionally mostly white, lots of police officers and firefighters who live up there. They have fought affordable housing from being brought into the community, and we've had a couple notable examples of this, fights going on within just the last couple of years. So that's the the context we're talking about here. But it circles back to what we're talking about the mayor, because I believe aldermanic prerogative is one of the ways, you know, aldermen stay in line with the mayor. This is the privilege that the aldermen have. It's one of the things that makes an alderman, you know, makes it worth to be an alderman, is the fact you get to basically control your own little ward, and then you let the mayor do whatever he wants citywide, right? All right. Yes, question back.
Governor Quinn, I ran for alderman in the 25th ward last time around, and I got booted off because of signatures, which was an entertaining process. I got to go in there myself and go through it. You know, they say you need 3x. I had two times the number of signatures. That wasn't, I was short by like tens of votes, or tens of signatures. And, you know, so 50,000 signatures to get a referendum on the ballot. Mental math, 2.7 million, that's like 2% of the population. That seems like a high hurdle. Same high hurdle it is to get on the ballot for alderman. How does that compare to the rest of the country or other cities? It seems, you know, I know I needed 500 to get on the ballot in 25th Ward. With 500 signatures, I could run for mayor of Detroit or mayor of Los Angeles, whereas here, you know, I can be alderman. So, you know, how does that compare, these hurdles that
Yeah.
have been put up?
Well, this is a very good question, because to run for alderman, I think it's 475 signatures this time out, something like
I
that.
think it's based on the number of votes in the previous
Yeah,
election.
so it could be up
something
and
like
down. You know, that's a number that a person going door to door or going to events in the ward, you probably can get that if you're really committed. I wouldn't make it any higher than that. Maybe I would say that's the ceiling, 500. And frankly, if it was lower, it wouldn't bother me any. I think the more people running for office, for aldermen, this is what democracy is all about. But, you know, for mayor, it's 12,500 to run for mayor. Now, there's a lot of aspirants right now, but I don't know if they can get by November 28th, the deadline, 12,500 signatures. And there's this whole industry, a cottage industry of individuals who specialize in knocking candidates and issues off the ballot. And it seems to me that when all is said and done, it's probably going to be the Illinois Supreme Court that says, if we're going to have a 21st century democracy, some of these requirements really are not necessary. And the court did, in a very famous case, it was called Anderson versus Snyder, some time ago. It said, you know, the issues at stake are not just the candidate and the petition passers who are trying to get something on the ballot. It's the voters at large. They're benefited by having robust competition. And I would hope in our case, if we have to go to the Illinois Supreme Court on this issue, we will try and strike down some of these restrictions on both candidates and issues that are just plain wrong or unfair. And I get sharp elbows, and we have won cases, and we intend to win this case, to make sure we have a vibrant democracy in Illinois. What we really need to get to is, for 21st century democracy, is where people can sign online in a secure way. You can pay your income tax in Illinois online. You can get a secure signature, as they've done in Arizona already for candidates. It's a lot easier system. It's easy, you know, to participate. We'd see a lot better, I think, democracy if we had that kind of system.
Pat, how many registered voters are in Chicago? Maybe Mick, you know this. In the last election, you know?
It's a little over about 1 million, I think.
So what percentage is the 50,000 of the registered voters, which is
The law is based on the percentage of those who voted for governor in the last election. So 52,519, the minimum we need, is 8% of those who voted for governor in the last election. And we got almost, I think it's 164% of that, about 15% of those who voted for governor in the last election. That's a pretty significant number. And, you know, we're counting on the court to follow its precedents, as it did in an initiative case in 1980, where it said, as I just said, the issues involve the petition passers, the signers, but also the voters. And we're not going to let insiders, incumbents with their ridiculous requirements back in 1980, it was almost, you had to be the same blood type in order to get the signature. You know, those kind of things are used by insiders to keep Ben Jarofsky off the ballot, so we don't want to have that.
Hi there. I think that I have more of a suggestion really than a question. And I've lived in Chicago for a very, very long time. But one of the things that my friends and I did recently, because I had never been to this neighborhood before, was to tour around Bronzeville. And I don't know how many people in this room have actually been to Bronzeville, but if you go, it's amazing, and the history is amazing there. And then last weekend, we went to the DuSable Museum of African American History, and I don't know how many people in Chicago who live on the north side know that there is in fact this great institution called the DuSable Museum of African American History in Hyde Park. And I came to this conclusion that, you know, the city doesn't really spend enough time or money kind of promoting the rich history of African Americans in the city, and what's been going on historically. So just kind of with that said as preamble, I was listening to Reverend Livingston say that part of the reason for the march and the way it went last weekend is because you wanted to bring people in the more poverty and crime-stricken neighborhoods in Chicago to see how the other half lives, let's say. And I guess I would say, here's my suggestion, maybe it needs to go the other way too. So, you know, you talk about tackling the desegregation or the segregation problem. Why not have a march or a festival of desegregation for one weekend where it goes the other way? I know that's fraught with all sorts of inherent biases. You know, you can automatically think of some people saying, we're not going to go to that neighborhood because we're scared. But that seems to me the thing that people need to get over. And that might actually help the situation. So more of a suggestion than a question.
Well, we did invite the Lakeview and Wrigleyville folk to have a march in Inglewood, have a march in Austin, have a march in Lawndale, you know, and you know, because basically, you know, reality lags perception, right? And there are these perceptions that exist, but typically, I'll be very honest with you, if we saw a whole bunch of white folk dressed nice with what you call them, deck shoes, the boat deck shoes on, and dockers, man, you know, and Brill Cream. You still use Brill Cream? Oh, I'm sorry. You know, everybody would just stand and stare. You know, they would be like, wow, what just happened? But it would be wonderful. It would be absolutely wonderful. Langston Hughes says, everybody likes to sing our blues, but nobody wants to live our blues. And so then to go from sympathy to empathy is an entirely different process altogether. But it doesn't reduce us, it enlarges who we are as people, as human beings. You know, because all of a sudden we connect with other spirits that have been impacted differently than our own. But now we're able to learn more about who we are because we're learning about somebody else. I mean, it's a reciprocating effect, right? It's a reciprocating process. Don't isolate yourself, engage. And it's like working out. You have to engage resistance, but the weights don't jump to you. You have to volunteer to engage resistance. And sometimes, again, it got to hurt bad enough because when you talk about crime rates, murder rates and stuff, it always cracks me up, man, when I hear these numbers like we're actuaries and stuff, right? People getting shot, you know? and it's just like, okay, a bunch of folk got shot this weekend. Are a bunch of folk going to get shot next weekend? I hope not, right? But, you know, we're not asking anybody to march through a war zone because, you know, that's literally a war zone when that happens like that, you know, in so many ways. But it's like, there are ways to do this. You went to the Jean-Baptiste DuSable Museum, you know, and but I know black folks who ain't been to the DuSable Museum because they have no consciousness of that rich history in Chicago. And you know, people talk about black history. Black history is American history. It happened in America, you know what I mean? And everything. So I'll talk to kids, white kids that go to different schools. I say, have you ever had like Black history. They're like, oh yeah, we had like 2 days of talking about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Barack Obama now, right? You know what I mean? Stuff like that. And it's like, but there's a rich history for all of us. All of us. You know, can I just say this real quick? A good friend of mine is a rabbi. He was talking to me about, you know, what's happening in our community, right? And so he said, you know, we talked about the Holocaust and slavery. And he said to me, Livingston, you know, we came out of the Holocaust in 1948, you know, Israel and all that. I said, well, Rabbi, I think the difference is this. The Holocaust was about the annihilation of your people. Slavery was about the dehumanization of the people. You're not going to destroy your labor force, but you have to dehumanize them because slavery is a science. The Romans had workhouses that the ceilings were low, so that when you finished working, you went into the workhouse, you could never stand up straight. You always had to bend over because the ceiling was so low, because what affects the body affects the mind and vice versa. And so I said, you don't have to reverse something in an annihilation. You have a remnant, to use that Old Testament biblical term. But to reverse the effects of dehumanization, I said, is in the Pentateuch. He says, what are you talking about? I said, you know, slaves are turned into beasts of burden. So the 10 Commandments are about acting human. Don't kill each other. Don't sleep with your neighbor's wife because you're going to have trouble in your community. Don't steal from each other. I mean, this is about reversing the effects of dehumanization. But what's the time frame on reversing those effects, right? Because you talk about slavery, Emancipation Proclamation, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and all that. And so oftentimes with many of my white brothers and sisters, they don't really have a consciousness of what it means to come back from dehumanization. It's a process, man, and it's not easy, especially when you have people that retard the process by some of the corrupt politics that takes place in a city like Chicago. But thank you for that.
We're out of time. We could obviously keep going for a long time, but thank you so much, Greg, Pat. Thank you both for taking the time. And thanks to all of you for coming out. Ron, if you're listening, we'd love to have you next month.
You got big balls.
So we're here. All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you next round. Take care.